Thank you guys for being here. My name is Kaihan Krippendorff. I'm the founder of Outthinker. Outthinker is a community of chief strategy officers that operate within enterprises, sort of a think tank. And we have 3 of our members here, which we're thrilled were able to join us. Next to me, we have Nadia Gill. She's a former Googler. She's also spent many years in industrial manufacturing settings, C-suite strategy officer, transformation officer. We have Shantnu Sharma, MIT alum, ex-McKinsey, career-long C-suite strategy officer, doing a lot of stuff on the kind of the infrastructure layer of AI, what now is AI, right? And we have Roopa, Unnikrishman, former Pfizer, former BlackRock, former Citibank, former Harman. She's at IDEX, always a strategy transformation role. So first of all, thank you guys for being here. Awesome. I think we're really excited to talk about this because it's something I think that is not yet being talked about. I think people, when they think of AI, we think of screens, and that's how we primarily interact with them. But what we're about to step into is a different era, we think, where AI becomes physical. And so that's what we want to get into. What are the implications? Who are the winners and losers? What the drivers are going to be. So let's start with Nadia. So we're talking about this idea that there's going to be this convergence of the physical and digital world. Mm-hmm. And right now they kind of exist separate, but they're going to be fused together as one thing. And so you've seen companies manage, and so what is the indicator for when we realize that a company, that moment where they really are embracing these two worlds as one?
Thank you. And a lot of my work has been actually here in Texas and in the Midwest, and there was, as of 2022, 2023, this kind of allergy to the word AI, and they would say, well, it's not really intelligent, it's just machine learning, it's just recognizing patterns. Now, the only reason why we started in my prior companies to do it, this is not Google, this is the manufacturing companies, was because there was this need and request by the board that was going to help us with the stock price. So in the moment we were mentioning AI or any AI layers on top of our products, was that we did see a small difference on the price, but it was kind of mandatory. Now, to your question, I think it's going to be, or there is already a convergence happening, and I know Shantnu is going to talk to us about his research, because it's not mandatory anymore. It's grassroots. We see it in the, in the energy of the employees at any level in the company, trying to find out ways in which they can automate the work that they are doing.
Great. Yes, that's a great point. And so then that is going to be driving us, whether it's coming down, top down from investors to boards or bottom up. It's from whatever direction, it's leading us to something that, Shantnu, you have a name for this, the convergence frontier. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Yes, thank you. So look, I think there's a nucleus of folks who are calling it the convergence frontier. It's the same thing as physical AI or embodied AI. What it really means is the physical world and the digital world, they're starting to overlap. We're getting into that zone where data and manufacturing are starting to merge. And I'll walk you through an example that is, software and operations starting to overlap. So if you think about, I don't know, maybe, a semiconductor manufacturing situation, table stakes today is that there are vision systems, and these are systems that are scanning for defects. And this is AI already being used extensively. But the convergence frontier really happens when an AI system picks a defect and then pushes it back upstream to the point where somebody or another system can actually do something about that defect, fix it, then it runs a simulation, and then it starts rolling it out. And as it's rolling it out, it's testing it so that because it wants to make sure that it's working well. This entire loop is this new convergence.
And Roopa, maybe can you bring that to life for us a little bit? For those of us who haven't spent a lot of time in the manufacturing environment, some of us can envision that, but maybe bring it to life in something that we experience day to day.
I'll give you a couple of quick examples. One is from my world. I was at Harman, and it's an automotive kind of technology industry, company. And I'm talking about 8 years ago, in order for us to try and create an autonomous car, we went in, we did an autonomous drive, which was really a little bit drive-by-wire, and then we open up the boot, and there's this huge, the whole boot was a huge compute unit, right? Because connectivity wasn't good enough, the data crunch wasn't good enough. So it wasn't something that was going to be sustainable. Now you have a democratization, and you have Waymos running around everywhere. Now, we can always talk about could they be better, all of that stuff, but that is sort of how you can see it already getting pulled in. AI is changing our physical environment. And if you now envision, say, an example, at IDEX, we are a company where we create components for critical issues, whether it's satellite technology or gene therapy, gene testing machines. In the past, all of that was done because of the trade secrets that lived in the heads of craftspeople and scientists. And now, when my board basically asked me and our leadership team, what are you doing around AI? I said, we have 4 ways to think about it, sales, marketing, operations, and, analytics. But when I went back and did an audit, it was actually happening in the front lines. We had robotics sort of machines that had been set up by our guys and gals at the front line who were sort of basically saying, I used to do this all myself now, and I had to do it 30,000 times a year. Now I have this machine that makes me much more efficient. So I can, by the way, do it 60,000 times a year better, right? Just doing the quality and sort of testing, for example. So we're actually already seeing behaviors where it's getting used in ways that are almost invisible to the leaders sitting up top, but can sort of be surfaced because people are starting to engage because of the ubiquity, the fact that you can train well and retain sort of that sort of specialization in the tools and technologies and the front lines where work is actually happening, right? So that's when you actually see convergence truly happening.
So, and I think this would be a question for all three of you then, starting with you, Roopa, then. You're seeing it happen, but what will be the indicator that will wake everyone up to that actually this is happening?
Well, first is price, right? I mean, the fact that you can actually start seeing extremely smart, interesting solutions that reach the consumer's hands, right, that are now much more accessible. I mean, I was talking the other day to Shark Ninja, the guys who used to make the vacuums. They now have these beauty technologies, and where you had to go into a spa and spend $1,000 to get your face done up, you can now, for $150, buy that same machine, and it's smart enough to be able to analyze your skin, do the work for you, and you're sitting pretty. Truly, right? So price, trust, right? Because you trust that you're not going to, burn the skin off your face.
Yes.
And of course, quality, right? Quality is always going to win. So those are the pieces I'd say.
I love it. Yes,
yeah.
I love it. Yeah, I mean the adoption is really that is the pace the frontier is ultimately adoption. Human adoption. How about you, Nadia? What's the indicator that this is actually happening? What are you going to look for in the market?
So again, we've been looking into this since the term AI started kind of gaining traction around 2018, and around 2023-24, we were looking to acquire, in my old job, a company that did the simulation for trainings that we could leverage for the rough environments where we operated that were too dangerous for humans to do. Think, the Gulf, for example. And now, we can do it for free with Google because Google just put out the technology away, and you just need to get it done. Either your engineers, your own engineers, you don't need to buy. So essentially, you're saving $150 million for the company just on this. And one of that. So again, M&A will always be an indicator of where the markets are moving, whether you are getting it for free, whether you have to pay for that. So I see a lot of that happening. I live in San Francisco, and believe it or not, there are a lot of physical AI startups in San Francisco, even if there is no manufacturing in San Francisco, precisely because of the access to equity and the talent that is there. So I see so much happening in San Francisco that and again, it starts in the coasts, either New York, San Francisco, and then it moves somewhere in the middle. So yeah, okay. A lot of action.
Okay, great. Yeah, so costs coming down towards zero,
For sure.
and the M&A activity and the VC activity also in that physical AI. What about you, Shantnu?
Well, it's going to be hard to beat your example from this far. So we should have just stopped that question at that point. I'll give a few dry examples because we cannot compete with that.
Diversity.
Yeah. Let's talk maybe from a business and tech landscape. Like everybody's familiar with LLMs. I think there's going to be a point where models are just good enough, maybe pretty good for non-physical mainstream intellectual tasks. And when that happens, then that's a turning point. Being a tech guy all through, so I'll then point at tech companies. So my second KPI that I'll measure. There'll come a point where large tech companies start talking about their market size differently. They're bolting on new chunks to their market size. That's when you know this is real. And then the last thing that I'll say is, robotics. Like today, it's a $50-100 billion end market. When you start analysts talking about a $500 billion or $1 trillion market, we were talking about this earlier. Barron saw something this weekend about a $1 trillion market. So I think those are the types of things that I want to see on the business side. Is it okay if we maybe just touch a couple of consumer-driven things as well?
Sure.
Yeah. Look, I think this is where AI is so unique because it's not only happening in the business world, it's happening in our day-to-day lives. So today, a lot of conversation in popular media about reshoring. A lot of that is driven by tariffs. Mm-hmm. At some point, that conversation will turn to reshoring driven by physical AI.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is that even without tariffs, manufacturing in proximity becomes more competitive than manufacturing far away.
100%. And maybe the last one that I'll throw out there, I think there's going to be a quote-unquote Sputnik moment where something happens, something's done by, by a fleet of robots, something that the general public never imagined a bunch of robots can do. And that'll happen, and that'll catch everybody's fancy, and I think things will start moving in upper gear after that.
I hope it's not the TI robots which are now being given guns or something like that. Sorry.
So then, you're talking about investment, and you're talking about when you just to clarify for people, what you're talking about is when technology companies no longer define themselves as technology, they start looking at and wanting to target manufacturing the physical components, right? And their valuations become based off of the idea that they can pursue that entire TAM. So I think the question then becomes who do you bet on? Who actually wins? And so Nadia, you've had half of your career in technology, half of your career in industrial manufacturing. So maybe you could tell us which side wins, or am I thinking of it wrong?
No, you're thinking
what companies
right.
win, yeah.
Yes, and the thing is that, for heading back to my example of M&A, we were always, in my prior jobs, we were always very careful to do acquisitions with the idea that either Amazon or NVIDIA or Google were not going to enter that, because hands down, they win. They have the capital, they have the talent. What can a manufacturing company compete against? With that said, as both the population preferences and age continues to evolve in the US and in the emerging markets as well, I think, as exactly what Shantnu has been mentioning, there will be this convergence that, it will not be relevant to ask who wins. It's more like, how can we get this done together?
Okay, great. Yeah, so I totally see that. I've also heard arguments that, hey, all the technology, they're making it, they're just giving it away. So anyone's going to have access to any technology, and what's going to be left is maybe the people, and but maybe it's also the infrastructure. Maybe so. Roopa, maybe I'm going to ask you to kind of take the opposite argument here. That
No, it's true.
Actually, industrial's going to win.
In fact, I should go get my @Team Human sort of hashtag or whatever, right? Because I have always been Team Human, even as I watched this for the last decade or more, actually. And there's a reason. I can take it from multiple angles. If you take purely the investor angle, right, you'd assume that there's been the Magnificent Seven are the ones that have driven the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange sort of valuation. But if you really look at anytime there's a slight dip in confidence, all that capital goes back to quality, right? So that is the investor. Like, where's the capital going? It goes back to quality. The IDEXs of the world, the Pfizers of the world exist and will continue to thrive because they do something that is actually essential and that they have huge amounts of expertise in. And I've been in the front lines with somebody in the automotive world, for example. But the second and third is exactly this, is that there's an intimacy with the problem that needs to be solved, and there's an intimacy with the customer, right? And years and sometimes decades of expertise. You lose, like the incumbent loses when they don't acknowledge that there is transformation happening. If you can acknowledge and integrate, you're great. I mean, I saw this at IDEX. The moment we had stopped, we thought about it, and we started explaining real examples of where AI is getting utilized, valuations were fine, right?
Yeah. I think it's right. I think that you have the human moat. Because of course, who has a moat that's going to allow them to own these bigger opportunities?
Exactly.
You have the human moat. You also have the ones that are performing. And I would also just point out that outside of the Magnificent Seven, all the remaining Fortune 500 companies, 95%, probably 100% existed before the internet existed.
Yeah, right.
They survived the internet.
Yes.
They have shown resilience against technology inflection points like this. How about you, Shantnu? Who's going to win? Maybe give us some specific companies.
Look, managing investments is not one of my core capabilities. But I'll maybe kind of drop on something you said. Because you dropped in the transformation word, and I'll say I would use a lens that thinks about what are the tools that the big popular companies have in the toolkit to drive a transformation that'll take advantage of this converged frontier. Maybe we'll talk about some of the Magnificent Seven companies. So you start with Meta. Not a big Facebook guy. I don't have the Meta glasses, but I wonder about them, because if you have those glasses, you're basically providing a data stream for a robot to get trained. So every time you lift your hand, that data can be used by physical AI to know how to lift your hand. I think that's an amazing set of capabilities that the company has. Look, we all spend a lot of time in front of a screen. Often it's an Apple screen, whether on a phone or if you're in the MacBook environment, then on your computer as well. So Apple's another company that has this fantastic set of, it has captured the consumer's eyeballs. Can it leverage that to do something really big in physical AI? Maybe. Amazon is known to be deploying robots in their warehouses. I've seen them. It's amazing. So they already have a leg up, so they're well situated. And then Tesla has a lot of moving parts. They're an AI company, they are a data company, they're an energy company, they know how to do manufacturing. Look, I mean, nobody knows, but they're all strong players.
Yeah. Yeah, because I guess what I'm kind of hearing from you is that if the interface, what matters now is the interface between, say, AI or technology and the physical. And I've been thinking of it as the arms and the hands of AI, and they have physical interfaces that they can then personalize for us. But I'm also hearing in terms of listening and observing the data capture. Like, what would it look like? How would you price a product when the only purpose of the product is to capture the data? Your bed, the bed that you make is actually just a data capture device. How would you price that? That's interesting. Yeah,
well, it is interesting, and I mean, if we just roll it back a few years and social media started to become big, I mean, it's all free, but it's free because they're getting something from you, so they've priced it accordingly, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, the only thing I would jump in and say, there's data capture, but then if you with the pace at which the analytic engine is getting sort of democratized, and I think you can go from capture to actuation, right? The bed can actually I have one of those temp sleep number thingies, and it comes in with all these gadgets that I have to physically change, but it could so easily just understand when the cooling system has to be switched on, right? And that, I think, is the step we're looking for, is when can that sort of actuation happen? Because then I think, we're there. We're getting there.
Yes. Yes. And that's why so much smart money has gone into smart homes and smart manufacturing plants that they've been anticipating this. Then maybe, Roopa, you can bring it to us to a little bit. So we've talked about investment. Mm-hmm. Who do you bet on, right? Not that we've come up with a conclusion, but I think we've talked about the pros and cons of each. Let's talk about now what it means for the rest of us. Talk to us about, the workforce or something like that, Roopa.
Well, so this is hits very close to home, and I mean it because I have 22-year-old twins, right? And so this is a burning issue for that generation, forget our generation. But what I have is a son who's charming, knows Mandarin, and has a job which is really at the core of it. He works for GuidePoint, and at the core of it is a sales job. He's convincing people to talk to people, right? Core sales. My daughter is in politics and policy, and she's out there organizing. Very human sets of skills, capabilities, connections that they're making. And I believe that's where the edge is for us. It's going to be about the human skills that we bring to the table that are going to actually still be relevant and essential. So I tell them not to panic, and I tell myself not to panic about it. I think as long as we remember that, the workforce is probably going to have an edge here.
Yes, I think I love that. I believe that, but I also really want to believe it. We were talking earlier that if you think about the company, we were talking about Peloton, right? Peloton after post-COVID, after those sales are no longer come in, their stock price plummets, and they shift their strategy and say, okay, it's not about the machine, it is about the people. That's about the trainers or the trainers who are characters, right? And you're going to pay for a subscription for an individual person. That's what's going to make you come back. The people. We talk about Starbucks, right? Starbucks is resurging now. They went from operational efficiency to the person who gives you the coffee and looks you in the eye, right? And we then way back when Best Buy was there with Circuit City. Amazon comes in, Best Buy leans into people. It's about the blue shirts, the people in the so there's lots of evidence that people can be the moat.
And companies need to know what their DNA is, right?
Yes.
If you understand it, just like the human, if you understand it and leverage it.
Yes, I love it. Yeah,
and
Nadia.
So this is an interesting example that we were discussing before lunch, which is in my prior job, we had this banner, we were next to the highway, and we had this banner of job, seeking entry-level workers for manufacturing and warehousing. And over the years, it became, instead of like a paper or cloth announcement, became a metal one, permanent, meaning that we were permanently looking for those workers. And again, this is before 2023, but the sign is still there, and there are many reasons for this, starting by the fact that a lot of young people now go to college and they no longer have the aspiration of working in the manufacturing plant next door. They want to go to the big cities. But also about the fact that, as Americans continue to have fewer and fewer kids, and the population shape is changing as well. So where there is a need, there is a will as well. And this is not my quote. This comes from the CEO of Honeywell, where they have this gap in workers, the same gap that we saw, and their R&D started to be focusing on how can we create robots or physical AI that is going to help us build what we need to build without having to depend on workers coming here to look for jobs. So they have been focusing in that area for a number of years. Now, put that into a little box. Let's talk about Google and the tech companies. In the beginning, it was all about, or there was in the news about, we are going to have, we are no longer going to need the junior engineers because ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini can do all of that. Now they are back to rehiring because guess what? Those young engineers need to grow into their middle management layer. And if they don't hire them now, someone else will hire them, called startups. And what are they going to do? You know what I mean? Because guess what? Their layers of engineers at the top are going to start retiring, or again, going to startups or PE. So there is this balance. It's shifting, constantly shifting. And I'm very optimistic about it. That I'm not worried yet. But my kids are younger, so I'm not worried yet. But at the end of the day, I think when the dust settles, it's all going to be about what makes you more human, and how can you manage the AI portion.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that I'm just going to sort of summarize my understanding of what I've heard is that there's some jobs that are just going to be replaced by physical AI. And we know Uber has been a transitional business model from the beginning, right? And they turn people into kind of robotic machines that drive you, and they're learning, and then they're replacing them, right? But they've known that when that's going to happen, that's been part of the plan, from the beginning. But then, so what's left for humans? And what you're saying is that there are things that you need humans for. There are lots that you need humans for that AI will not be able to replace. And what you're saying is the pipeline issue, which is a huge issue. Who's going to be the surgeon that's going to operate on your children if that person doesn't get a chance to be in the operating room now, right? Our pipeline is going to disappear. Shantnu, I have a different question for you, but unless you have something you want to say here.
No, I just maybe want to add one thing to this, which is, look, I think this future where people and machine coexist, I think it's coming. It's already here, and nobody knows whether it'll be people dominated or machine dominated. But I do believe that the size of the economic pie has to be significantly larger, so that men, women, and machines can all benefit from that. And I think going back to this converged frontier physical AI, my hope and aspiration is that convergence will create economic prosperity for everyone.
Gotcha, yes. Because the investments that are going to go into that are based off of the net present value of what that potential future is. And so the last question for you, Shantnu, is just, let's just stress test this a little bit. What could go wrong? What could prevent this frontier from actually emerging as quickly as we're betting it will?
Yeah, look, a lot could go wrong. When we started our conversation today, we talked about this kind of loop where you are having physical and digital come together. When you think about the physical environment, I think a big factor is going to be these large language models, these AI models, how fast and how well will they generalize to the factory environment? And let me kind of put this in perspective. So you have a physical AI solution, and if you can pretty much take it and rinse and repeat it across multiple environments, then you've created a lot of economic value, step function improvement in productivity. But if you have to go and like customize it and fine tune it for each one of these environments, then there's a lot of leakage. Mm-hmm. So look, physical AI is real, but that pie that we talked about will only grow substantially if it can scale up and become a new platform.
We've talked about it before, but I guess we're going to open up for questions in a second. But the way the analogy I'm thinking of is, I used to use Dragon Naturally Speaking. Do you know that? It's like a voice to text, right? And you have to, it has to be trained on your voice, and you have to learn how to use it, and it learns you. And so the ramp up time is a while. But then, AI allows us to do speech to voice without. And so that's the difference, right? Will we have to go through a retraining and a reconfiguration every time we move it to a different space? Yeah?
I think so.
Yeah. All right. We have time for a few questions. Who has a question? Okay, great. Thank you.
Hi, I do have a question. So I'm Alex from Canada. I was recently working with a large North American manufacturer, and they actually had a cyber incident. So the outcome of that, obviously, they lost money, obviously, but is essentially all these acts and the board, they are now resistant to any sort of AI or automation, or even robotics adoption. But meanwhile, their competitors are investing on all of that, right? So how do you measure that balance or trade-offs between risk and innovation, and what you think should be what should we tell the board to convince them that even though they have all those risks, they are real, but if they don't do anything, they will lose to whatever competitor is less risk averse?
Wow. We actually just did a challenge forum yesterday with our members. I didn't attend, unfortunately.
I
but
did.
It was you did, so tell us. What's the answer?
Oh, God. Right. So we had a similar, what he calls the challenge is a similar question. Someone prompts a question, and it's all about the reframing. And by the way, we had the same issue in my prior job where we were implementing AI and the workers actually were the ones sabotaging it. Similar to what Kaihan said, the workers had to train the AI. And yes, actually the ultimate objective was to cut headcount. And the workers they know it, so it just failed 3 times. So it's all about education and figuring out, choose your poison. Either the company is going to go down, or you are going to have a few years where you will have to find spaces for that headcount. That decision needs to be done usually at the board level, at the C level. Just as an example, last week I met with my board of my current job, and they were asking the same because we are working with data centers and we cannot hire enough, fast enough. Like, we really need a lot of workers, and they were asking us that same question. With AI, are we going to do layoffs later? So it's a matter of educating your board, educating your C-level, and then trickling that down over the organization.
I'll only add one more thing, is that so I run strat process, and so it's been about 4.5 years at IDEX. We've been making AI, the impact of AI, a key part of the strategic conversation. So you have 9,000 people actually actively thinking about it. And the first step we took, that our IT department took, was they were all about the risk, right? Where's the data going to live in? Which are the, models, the analytic models we're going to use, et cetera. So we solved the risk part almost first with that. But the problem then was that people were going, cowboy and sort of doing their analytics with their home machines, right? So we said, all right, that we need to very quickly move into value creation. So our board actually, we brought them along. You have to educate them. You can't actually so there is a responsibility, whether it's with a strategist, with the CEO, with the IT department, whoever it is, there has to be a true clear-eyed advocate that is also risk-oriented. Because you can't just be the innovator who then lands up with a huge bill because all of our data is out there, right? So it does require a different way of thinking at a very agile level to win. Yeah, so.
I was just going to say, and I think Michael Porter said this, but I may have gotten this wrong, that the single largest determinant of the profitability of a company is the industry in which that company exists. And I think I would just maybe look to that to maybe answer your question. Every organization needs to find that efficient, risk versus innovation frontier. But that frontier is really determined by what industry are you in, whether you're consumer facing or not, where in your life cycle are you a startup company or an established company? So take all those things into mind and find that efficient frontier.
Yeah. I would just add, I think investor relations should sit under strategy, because what you're talking about, like if you think what MasterCard was able to do, it was a bank association, $25 a share, turns into a technology company, $350 a share. It was able to convince the market that they were a technology company. So if you're able, I think we have to consider that other
Side of the coin.
that other side of the coin. Yeah. And, yes, please.
Thank you.
If you don't mind.
Yeah, I can. Thank you for the panel here and a very informative session. My name is Nitin Patel. I have a company called Accunext. We are basically playing in the physical AI space, but my question is, what kind of challenges do you see in this convergence, and where are the opportunities for, let's say, emerging startup companies?
Do you want? I mean, who wants to take it? Yeah, because we've.
Look.
We're talking about the whole supply chain, maybe, and
Yeah,
energy
let's
and all that.
maybe start there. Look, one thing that we all know is that if you put your finger on any reasonably complex technology or technology solution, there's an awesome supply chain and value chain standing behind it. And it's a big task to make sure that those things continue to work. What started happening with AI, because almost every industry is looking at it, and to make it worse, even consumers are looking at it. It's like just the focus of everybody's attention. All the challenges that are in that supply chain and value chain, all of a sudden, are front and center for everybody to see. So if you think about AI, not too long ago, advanced packaging for semiconductors was a big issue. Fast forward today, it's about, then it was HBM, now it's, DRAM and storage. Now people are talking about the ability to get data center space and power and so on and so forth. So these problems continue to surface, and then the industry kind of gets around and fixes it, then another problem surfaces. So if the industry is not able to fix one of these problems, then that creates a major issue. The other thing that will be interesting is some of these problems will also result in innovation and disruption. So power today is a big gate. But if an alternative source of power has become reality for a data center, say geothermal or something like that, or modular reactors, then all of a sudden you don't need a lot of scale to take care of power. New players will come into the market, a lot of disruption.
Yeah. I have.
No, I was going to sort of actually energy was the center of it, because if you heard the story about how the people who made money during the gold rush were the guys who made the shovels, right? So I think for us to really understand what are the shovels out there, and there's energy, there's the generation, but there's just like energy management, energy sort of, the coolant guys are making money. So I do think that that's an element for us to consider, is like, what are those ancillary elements that need to be put in place? Both where can you create value and wealth, but ensure that the system actually works.
So I have a very quick story, and this is relevant for you as the owner of your startup. In my prior job at Hitachi, we were working with a startup, because now a lot of big companies are doing this. Let's hire a startup to help us implement this specific AI use case in manufacturing or in the back office function. Now, here is the issue. There is these different worlds between the corporation and the startup. A lot of the startups in San Francisco are dropped out Stanford kids, 18, 17-year-old who decided to, create their startup. Here is the issue. When we work with those, their startup went to die in the middle of the project, and that made the company allergic to work with the startup. So if you are here's my advice, whoever has a startup here, if you're starting to work with a big corporation on this, the most important thing you need to show is resilience, because you will go through several iterations of the application of your product on this company, and you have to roll with the punches, and if you achieve that, then you will get a lot of contracts in sister companies, because the industry is very small. We all know each other. So I would be, like, if I work with you and I love what you did for my company, I would call Shantnu and say, Shantnu, your company is doing this, you need to call this guy.
Great, awesome. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Otherwise, ask people to... Any one more question? So what's your what do you want to leave us with? We'll go quickly down the line. Like, what should someone who's listening, because we've covered things that in preparing for this, you guys have dropped little bits of wisdom that actually have huge implications, and I think that someone listening to this for the first time misses a lot of the implications. So what's one thing that if 6 months from now these people bump into someone in the hallway and say, what was that session about? And they forgot everything. What would be like the one takeaway that you think people should remember?
Well, I would actually have you all go look up an article that's called The Anthropic Hive Mind, and it sort of talks about atoms over electrons. In other words, things that are created out of atoms, products, are going to actually win versus electrons, where it's only data and information. Because data and information is going to get, transformed, whereas the atom is going to be necessary to capture value. So
Right.
atoms over electronics.
I'm all voting for that, yes. Shantnu?
Well, when I was a little boy, my mother used to say, stop living in the video game. And I can now say that one takeaway is that the physical and the digital are converging. That's the one takeaway.
Yeah, awesome.
The future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed.
Right.
That is truer than ever. So if you want to, make money or create your startup or just make it big, find where it is not yet distributed.
And I would say Salesforce tried forever to sell its concept, and it had signs, not software. And it wasn't until someone introduced the idea of the metaphor of the cloud. And when the cloud was introduced, then everyone understood it, and there was massive adoption, and as a service across every industry. I think that's what we're waiting for, is what is that core metaphor that actually gets our head around what this actually means when there is this convergence. Awesome. Thank you very much for your questions and for your attention. It was great being here, and thank you for our panelists for joining us. Thank you. Thank you.